The velvet curtain brushed against my shoulder. I could hear my name echoing through the speakers in the convention hall. 2,000 people were waiting. This was supposed to be my moment, the announcement that would launch my political career. Then my father walked onto the stage instead. His smile was wide and confident. The crowd erupted in applause. I stood frozen backstage, watching through the gap in the curtains as he gripped the podium with both hands. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he said, his voice booming through the microphone. "I know you expected to hear from my daughter, Vesper, but after much thought and prayer, I've decided to run for Senate again this year." The crowd cheered louder. Cameras flashed like lightning, and I felt something inside me die. He'd just stolen my campaign, my announcement, my future, and he'd done it in front of everyone I'd spent 2 years building relationships with. I kept my face neutral, smiled like this was all part of the plan. But inside, I was screaming. The applause felt like a slap. Each clap was a reminder that they chose him over me, that they didn't even question it, that in their minds, he was the real politician, and I was just his daughter playing dress up. My father kept talking. He said I'd inspired him to continue serving, that watching me prepare for this race had reminded him why public service mattered. He made it sound noble, like he was doing me a favor. Behind me, I heard someone gasp. It was Miranda, the makeup artist who'd been doing my face for campaign events for months. She'd stopped moving, her hand frozen in midair with a powder brush. "Did you know about this?" she whispered. I shook my head. I couldn't speak yet. If I opened my mouth, something ugly would come out, something I couldn't take back. So I just stood there, watching my father bask in applause that should have been mine. After the speech, I found him backstage. He was surrounded by advisors and donors, all congratulating him on his brave decision. I waited until they dispersed, then stepped into his path. "Why?" I asked quietly. He looked at me and wiped sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. "It's not personal, VES. You're good at this, really good. But I'm the brand. The Reigns name means something because of me. You'll get your turn eventually." There was no apology in his voice, no guilt, just matter-of-fact certainty that he'd made the right choice. "You could have told me," I said. He shrugged. "You would have tried to talk me out of it. This way was cleaner. Cleaner. Like my career was a mess he needed to tidy up." He patted my shoulder and walked away, already talking to someone else on his phone. I stood there alone in the empty hallway and realized something important. He wasn't sorry. He was proud. I stayed for the rest of the evening. Dinner, donor meetings, networking sessions. I smiled and shook hands and acted like everything was fine. My father introduced me to people as his daughter, future senator, someday. They laughed like it was charming, like he was being supportive instead of condescending. One donor, a man named Garrett who'd pledged $50,000 to my campaign, clapped my father on the back. "Smart move, sir. Let her learn from watching you one more term." I gripped my champagne glass so hard I thought it might shatter. But I kept smiling, kept nodding, kept playing the part of the dutiful daughter. Because I'd already decided something. If you wanted to play dirty, I could play dirtier. I just needed to be smart about it. By the end of the night, I had a plan forming in my mind. It was patient, strategic, and it would hurt him exactly where he deserved to be hurt most. Within 24 hours, everything changed. The campaign website was updated. My headshot was removed from the main page. My bio disappeared. In its place was my father's face, larger than before, with the words, "Experience you can trust." Emails stopped coming. Speaking invitations were quietly rescinded. People who'd been excited to work with me suddenly couldn't return my calls. I called my father. "What's happening with the website?" "We're rebranding," he said casually, consolidating the message. "Don't worry. You're still listed as an advisor." I checked. He was right. At the very bottom of the team page, in small print, Vesper Reigns, policy consultant. From candidate to consultant in one day. When I confronted him about it, he said he was protecting me from early exposure, that I wasn't ready for the scrutiny that came with a real campaign. Translation? I was a threat to his relevance, and he decided to eliminate the competition. I went to see my mother that afternoon. She lived in the family estate on the edge of town, a place she'd retreated to after my parents quietly separated years ago. They kept up appearances publicly, but privately they barely spoke. Did you know? I asked her. She was sitting in the sunroom, stirring her tea in slow circles. She didn't look up. Know what? That he was going to steal my announcement. She kept stirring. The spoon clinked against the china cup, over and over. You know how your father is. He gets anxious about legacy, about the family name. So you did know. She finally looked at me. Her eyes were tired. I suspected. But what was I supposed to do? He doesn't listen to me anymore. No defense. No outrage on my behalf. Just soft complicity. Just the same pattern she'd followed my entire childhood. Letting him make every decision and pretending she was powerless to stop him. I left without finishing my coffee. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't do any of the things he probably expected. Instead, I booked a flight back to Washington, D.C. and started packing. I'd been living in our home state for 2 years, preparing for the campaign. Now there was no reason to stay. My father called while I was folding clothes. Where are you going? Back to D.C. I still have my old consulting job. They said they'd take me back if things didn't work out. VES, don't be dramatic. You can still be involved in the campaign. I don't want to be involved in your campaign, I said calmly. I wanted my own. But you took that from me. He sighed. You'll understand someday. This is about timing. Strategy. I hung up before he could say anything else. Because if I stayed on the line, I'd say things I couldn't take back. Not yet. Not until I was ready. What my father didn't understand was that I knew everything about his operation. I'd been his campaign manager when I was 19. I'd learned from the best, which meant I'd learned from him. I knew which reporters owed him favors, which aides cleaned up his mistakes after hours, which donors expected special treatment, which votes he'd cast for reasons that had nothing to do with policy. I knew where the bodies were buried, because I'd helped bury some of them. He thought sending me away meant I was neutralized, that I'd fade into the background like a good daughter and wait my turn. He had no idea I'd been keeping records, not because I planned to use them, but because he'd taught me to always have insurance. Now, that insurance was about to become a weapon. I started with a calendar, a simple document tracking every interaction, every favor, every meeting where I'd done the work, but he'd taken the credit. February 2021. I wrote the education reform proposal. He presented it as his own idea and got a standing ovation. June 2021. I negotiated the endorsement deal with the teachers' union. He showed up for the photo op. November 2021. I managed the crisis when his old college roommate tried to sell a story about their fraternity days. I paid the man off quietly. My father never even knew it happened. I had dates, names, receipts. Not because I was planning revenge back then, but because that's what good campaign managers do. They document everything. Now I had a roadmap, and I was going to follow it carefully. 2 weeks after I returned to DC, I got a message from someone unexpected. Tanya, a former intern from my father's office 3 years ago. Hey, I saw what happened at the announcement. That was brutal. Are you okay? We met for coffee. She was nervous, fidgeting with her cup. I shouldn't say anything, but after what he did to you, I don't feel like I owe him loyalty anymore. What do you mean? I asked carefully. She told me about things that had happened during her internship. Comments that crossed lines. Promises that were never kept. How she tried to report concerns to HR, but the complaints mysteriously disappeared. I listened. I took notes. And when she asked if I was going to do anything with the information, I said, maybe. But if I do, I'll make sure your name stays out of it. She nodded, relieved. He's not who people think he is. I know, I said. I've known for a long time. That night, I pulled out the speech I'd written for the announcement. The one I'd spent months perfecting. The one that was supposed to introduce me as a serious candidate with serious ideas. It was good. Really good. It talked about the future instead of the past. About new solutions instead of old promises. About bringing new voices into politics instead of recycling the same dynasties. I'd shown it to my father 2 weeks before the event. He'd read it and said it needed polish. That it was a bit too aggressive. Reading it now, I understood. It hadn't been too aggressive. It had been too threatening. Because if I'd given that speech, people would have started asking why they needed him when they could have me. So he'd taken the whole thing away. Not to protect me, but to protect himself. While going through old campaign files, I found something interesting. A photo from a donor gala 2 years ago. My father was in the background, laughing with someone. A woman who wasn't my mother. Someone married to a powerful state senator. They were standing too close. His hand was on her lower back. Her lipstick had left a mark on his collar that I could see even in the photo. I remembered that night. I'd been the one to get his jacket dry cleaned the next day. I'd seen the stain but hadn't thought much about it then. Now I thought about it a lot. I didn't leak the photo. Not yet. But I saved it to a secure folder. Timing was everything. My father had taught me that. Over the next month, I quietly reached out to people who'd worked on my father's campaigns over the years. Retired staff who'd moved on to other jobs. People who had no reason to stay loyal. They assumed I was harmless, just a disappointed daughter looking for sympathy. So they talked freely over drinks and dinner. And what they told me made my chest tighten. Stories about donor money that disappeared into personal expenses. About votes that were promised to one group but delivered to another. About a pattern of saying whatever people wanted to hear, then doing whatever benefited him most. None of it was illegal. He was too smart for that. But it was ethically questionable. And in politics, ethics matter almost as much as laws. I recorded some conversations, took notes on others, built a timeline that showed patterns instead of isolated incidents. My father had always said that patterns tell the real story. He was right about that, at least. For months after he stole my campaign, my father announced he was writing a memoir. The Rise of the Reign's name would tell the story of his political career and his vision for the future. He called me one evening. I'd like you to help edit it. You're a good writer, and it would be good for us to work together again. I said yes immediately. Of course I did. He had no idea what he just handed me. Complete access to his official story. The version he wanted the public to believe, which meant I could compare it to the truth and find every place where they didn't match. We started meeting once a week. He'd send me chapters and I'd provide feedback. I asked careful questions. Are you sure this timeline is right? Do you want to mention this vote or skip it? He trusted me because I was his daughter, because he'd trained me, because he thought he'd broken my spirit. He hadn't. He'd just made me more patient. I rewrote sections of his memoir carefully. I didn't change his voice or his stories. I just made sure the facts were accurate. The real timeline, the actual voting record, the true story of what happened behind closed doors. He skimmed the changes and approved them. He was too busy campaigning to read carefully, too confident that I wouldn't dare cross him. The manuscript went to his publisher in early fall, and then we waited for the fact-checkers to do their job. It didn't take long. The publisher called him in November. They'd found inconsistencies between his memoir and public records. His explanation of certain votes didn't match what actually happened. His timeline of events had gaps that raised questions. They were concerned about the liability. They wanted to delay publication pending further review. My father was furious. He blamed his research assistant, blamed the fact-checkers for being too aggressive, never once considered that someone might have set him up. The book deal fell apart completely by December. The publisher pulled out, citing irreconcilable issues with factual accuracy. My father tried to spin it as the publisher being politically motivated, but the damage was done. Other publishers passed. Agents stopped returning calls, and reporters started asking questions. If his memoir couldn't pass basic fact-checking, what else had he been lying about? His poll numbers started dropping, not dramatically, but steadily. He was still the frontrunner, but people were starting to doubt him. Meanwhile, something else was happening. A young woman named Sienna had announced she was running against him in the primary. A grassroots candidate with no money and no name recognition. Nobody took her seriously, except me. I reached out to Sienna through a mutual contact. We met at a quiet coffee shop in D.C. She was nervous, clearly wondering why Senator Raines's daughter wanted to talk to her. I saw your announcement speech, I said. It was good. Raw but good. You need strategy. I can't afford a strategist, she admitted. I'm running this whole campaign on volunteers and small donations. I slid a folder across the table. Inside was everything. My playbook. The same strategies my father had taught me. Messaging frameworks. Debate prep. Opposition research guidelines. Consider this a donation, I said. She stared at the folder, then at me. Why would you help me? He's your father. That's exactly why, I said. She didn't ask anything else. She just took the folder and thanked me. A week later, her campaign messaging shifted, became sharper, more focused, and people started paying attention. In January, something unexpected happened. The photo from the donor gala, the one I'd filed away, started circulating online. I didn't leak it, but someone who'd seen it in old campaign files had. It trended for 6 hours. Conservative blogs picked it up. Opposition researchers started digging into the woman in the photo. My father's PR team went into crisis mode. They released a statement calling it a deep fake created by political opponents. They said artificial intelligence had been used to create a false scandal. But the photo was real. The lighting was too perfect. The lipstick stain too visible. And forensic analysts quickly confirmed it hadn't been digitally altered. The woman's husband, the state senator, threatened to sue for defamation, then quietly filed for divorce instead. My father's numbers dropped again. In February, Sienna's campaign released new promotional materials. Her posters listed her policy team. And there, under policy advisor, was my name. Vesper Raines. The press picked it up immediately. Senator Raines's daughter joins opponent's campaign, read the headlines. Reporters started calling me. At first, I didn't answer. But then a journalist from a major outlet showed up at my apartment building. She waited in the lobby for 3 hours until I agreed to talk. Why are you working with your father's opponent? She asked. I smiled calmly. I believe in what she's fighting for. New voices, new ideas, a new generation of leadership. But your father announced he was running again instead of you. Some say he stole your moment. I won't comment on family dynamics, I said. But I will say this. Just because someone gives you a name doesn't mean you owe them your silence. The interview went viral by that evening. The next morning, I did a longer interview with a political podcast. They asked direct questions, and I gave direct answers. No anger, no dramatics, just facts. Were you groomed for a political career? The host asked. Absolutely. From the time I was a teenager, I was learning how campaigns work, how messaging works, how power works. And now you're using those skills against your father. I'm using those skills to support a candidate I believe in. If that happens to be against my father, that's his choice, not mine. He chose to run instead of stepping aside. The interview was calm, professional, almost clinical in tone. And that made it hit harder than rage ever could. Because I wasn't acting like a scorned daughter. I was acting like a political operator. And everyone knew where I'd learned to be one. By March, the impact was visible. Donors started quietly pulling their support from my father's campaign. Not publicly, where it would look bad for them, but privately, through reduced contributions and canceled fundraisers. My father couldn't understand why. He called me once angry and confused. What did you say to Garrett? He just cut his donation in half. I didn't say anything to Garrett, I said truthfully. I hadn't needed to. Garrett had drawn his own conclusions after watching my interviews. You're destroying everything I built. No, I said calmly. I'm showing people what you built it on. There's a difference. He hung up. We didn't speak again after that. In April, my father tried one more time to reach me. He left a voicemail late at night. His voice sounded tired. Vesper, we need to talk. You've misunderstood everything. I was trying to protect you. The campaign trail is brutal, and I didn't want you to get hurt. Call me back. Please. I saved the voicemail, but I didn't respond, because his words sounded like the same manipulation he'd used my entire life, making his choices sound like sacrifices, making his control sound like protection. I was done letting him rewrite reality. He wasn't the gatekeeper anymore. I was. The first debate between my father and Sienna happened in late April. I sat in the audience, 3 rows back, watching. Sienna was nervous at first, But when the moderator asked about education policy, she launched into a detailed explanation that sounded remarkably familiar, because it was based on the research I'd done 2 years ago. My father tried to respond, but he stumbled. He talked about his experience, his record, his decades of service, but he didn't have specifics, just vague promises and old talking points. The moderator smiled slightly. The audience stayed quiet, and I watched my father realize in real time that experience wasn't enough anymore. After the debate, he tried to blame media bias, said the questions were designed to make him look bad. But everyone could see the truth. He'd been unprepared, and Sienna had been sharp. 2 weeks after the debate, a major newspaper published an op-ed. The headline read, "When Dynasties Choke Progress." The article didn't mention my father by name, but the subtext was clear. It talked about political families who recycled the same leaders instead of making room for new voices, about how inherited power often meant inherited problems. The timing wasn't coincidental. I'd spoken to the writer weeks earlier, not for an interview but for background, just sharing observations, providing context. The piece went viral. Within days, similar articles appeared in other outlets. The narrative was shifting. My father was yesterday's news, the old guard, the generation that needed to step aside. And I wasn't even on the ballot, but I'd already won. Sienna won the primary in June, not by a landslide, but by enough, 52% to my father's 43%. At her victory rally, she invited me to speak. I stood at the podium and looked out at the crowd of young people, organizers, volunteers, people who believed politics could be different. My father gave me a name, I said clearly. He gave me training. He gave me access. But those were tools, not chains. And when he tried to decide my future for me, I gave it all back and built something of my own. The crowd roared. Signs waved. People chanted Sienna's name. I looked out at them and didn't search for my father in the crowd. I didn't need to know if he was watching, because this moment wasn't about him anymore. It was about what came next, about proving that legacies don't have to be inherited. They can be earned. And sometimes the best way to honor a name is to show what it looks like when it's built on truth instead of control. I stepped back from the podium. Sienna took my place, and I stood beside her and not behind her while she spoke about the future. My father had ended my career in politics, but in doing so, he taught me the most important lesson of all. Power doesn't come from a name. It comes from knowing when to walk away from one.